Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. And today we are joined by a Reds legend. We've spoken to a few former players, but none who have achieved what our guest Garry Birtles has done. So we're very grateful to have you on, Garry. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Good. I wanted to talk to you about your career, but kind of through the lens of playing for Brian Clough, because we talk a lot on this podcast about modern day Forest, and we might touch on that a bit. But a lot of people won't kind of appreciate the genius of Clough. They'll have heard about him, obviously, but you've played for him. Do you remember your kind of first meeting with Clough? Because you signed from Long Eaton, you were kind of plucked from nowhere, weren't you? Can you kind of elaborate on that first encounter and how you arrived at Forest?
I arrived at Forest after he came and saw me in I think it was an FA Cup qualifier at Enderby Town. I don't think they exist anymore. And I was playing, and I think their centre-half went straight through me and split my pad. I had to come off, but I came back on and carried through the game. And I think at that particular point, he said my performance, the half-time OXO was better than my performance on that particular day. But he stuck with me and gave me the opportunity, and I had a month's trial, and then they signed me.
We're live streaming on Facebook as normal, so if you do have any questions for Garry, do drop them in the comments section, and we'll put some to him later on in the show. When did you find out Forest were interested then? I mean, it must have come like a bit of a bolt from the blue for a lad who was fitting carpets in Long Eaton. That must have been a bit of a shock.
Well, there were rumours going around. I actually nearly signed for Peterborough United because John Barnwell and I think it was Noel Cantwell at the time came to see me at Gedling where we were training and tried to convince me to sign for them. But a guy called John Rayner, who I was with at Clifton Allwhites when I played for them, who then became the chairman of Long Eaton, told me to wait because he'd heard Forest were interested. And if it hadn't been for him saying that, everything I achieved with the team and everything might not have happened. I might not have got the opportunity. So I've got a big thank you to him for what he, the advice he gave me on that night. Obviously,
Brian Clough would go on to change your life, set you on a totally different path and make you successful. Do you remember, I've asked other players about their first meeting with him. Do you remember that first meeting vividly in terms of how nervous you were and that kind of thing?
The first encounter really was a strange one because when you sign, you're not in the first team, you're in the away dressing room,
right?
And before you go training, and there was a little desk table in the corner, and for some reason I was sat on it. And he usually came in through where the players' entrance is, where the referee's room is, but for some reason he came through the double doors where the boardroom now is, saw me sat on the table, and said, "Son, get off my table now." Just to let me know that he was in charge, and that was going to be the way it is from that point on. And nice introduction. Who's the boss, and then you get on with it.
What was it like going into that Forest dressing room? Obviously, they weren't the team they became, but they had a lot of players who would go on to achieve so much alongside you. What was that initial dressing room experience like?
Well, you're always nervous. All through my career, when I went to other clubs, Manchester United, even Grimsby, you're really nervous of going in because you don't know anybody. You want everything to be okay. And luckily, again, all the lads were fantastic. There was no egos. Everybody tried to make you feel welcome. Yeah, there was competition for places. The people who were in your position probably thought, "Oh, crikey, somebody else is here." But it was a good introduction. And Frank Clark was a massive help to me. Going through that early phase, going to training and everything. I remember that really well. So I've got a lot to thank Frank for as well. But yeah, I settled in quite well.
What was life like for a new professional footballer in 1976? Obviously, the money was different. Was the lifestyle particularly different from what people say about it?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, coming off building sites, working in the middle of winter with no heat, freezing cold, when winters were proper winters in those days, to go and do that on a daily basis was just an absolute pleasure and delight. Laying floors, you're in confined spaces with adhesive that you're putting on skirting boards that, you're floating. If you're in a tight, little area, you had to keep getting out because it was that strong. So to be going training, running out in the open air was an absolute pleasure. And, one I'm profoundly thankful for.
When did you make your debut? 1977 again. In
76, yeah, I think it was 76 against Hull City in the then was the second division, as they called it then. And Billy Bremner was supposed to be playing for them at that particular point in midfield. I was playing in midfield, which I didn't particularly like because I came as a striker. But Billy Bremner was injured, and I played in midfield. I think we won the game, didn't score, and my performance was particularly average. And Brian Clough said, "Son, if I ever play you there again, give me a shotgun and I'll shoot myself." So that was, the impression I made in midfield with Brian on that particular occasion.
Did you think you were done at that point? You think you'd blown your opportunity or not?
Well, I couldn't understand at the time why he was playing midfield when I was signed as a striker, but I think it was to build me up because I was skinny. I was no weight on me. I think it was just get my stamina up and get me up to the standard that he expected. So looking back, it was good for me, and I was a good athlete. I love running, so it wasn't a problem to me. And I started, getting a lot of confidence, scoring goals from that position, and eventually I got my place back up front, which is what I wanted.
I remember Steve Chettle saying he made his debut as a right winger at Chelsea, and Clough did he did odd things. Obviously, at what point did you realise he was a different manager, but obviously a genius to go with it? Did that hit you straight away?
Well, going back a little bit before I actually got there, I signed a petition in the Palais, which is no longer exists. Palais de Danse, it was called. It had the first revolving dance floor in the country. Right. And I went out on a night out, and there was a petition to get Brian Clough to Nottingham Forest. It was this long sheet of paper. It was just absolute reams of paper with people, and my signature was on that. So hopefully I played a part in getting him there. Yeah, he was just, and then I quickly became his squash partner because he knew I played squash. I loved playing squash, and I was thinking of trying to take it up professionally at one point because I was turned down by Aston Villa when I was 15, and it was a strange introduction. I was often taken off the training pitch by one of the apprentices saying, "Guys, you've got to come and play squash with the gaffer." So caked in mud, I had to run back up, get in his Mercedes, go across to Trent Bridge cricket ground where the squash courts were, and play squash. So that was a strange introduction as well. I can't see that happening today. You can't see Raheem Sterling or anybody like that going to play squash with Pep Guardiola, could you? I wouldn't have thought.
No. Well, you can't see a kid from Curzon Ashton ended up in Man United midfield a few weeks later either these days.
No, I suppose not. But it was a bizarre introduction, to say the least.
Did the playing squash thing give you a different insight with him? Did it give you a different relationship, do you think, to other players had with him or not?
No, it didn't make you a favourite. If anything, it was the other way. I can remember playing for the reserves where the games used to be at the City Ground, and we were playing Derby, of course, the big game. And I thought I played an hour squash with him in the morning. So I thought if my performance wasn't particularly good, he'd be okay with me. But all you could hear right through the game was him having a go at me. And it echoed round the ground. His voice was strong anyway, as everybody knows.
Yeah.
But it just echoed round, and, he was giving me so much stick. And again, it's another learning curve for you. You don't expect because you're doing one thing like that, playing squash, that you are a favourite. You have to earn the respect, in what you're there to do, which is play football. So, good early lessons, and, you took them all on board.
Did you beat him at squash? Were you allowed to beat him?
No, he used to cheat a little bit. If anybody who knows squash, if you go across the opponent, you're supposed to ask if, would you like that again? In professional squash, that would be straight away. And he always used to ask me, "Son, would you like that again?" And I always used to say, "No, you're okay, boss." Because I was in the reserves then. I think I played him a couple of times after I got in the first team and changed my mind after that, saying, "Yeah, I'll have that again, please." But when you're in the reserves, you just don't even attempt that at all.
You hit the ground running when you did get in the team, didn't you? You scored against Liverpool early on in the European Cup, and you had early success. How did he keep your feet on the ground, and how did the other players keep your feet on the ground if they needed to?
Well, my first game debut was against Arsenal on the Saturday with Gary Mills, who was 16, making his debut on the same day. So we beat them, I think, 2-1. And when I came off, he said, "Son, your name's first on the team sheet for the Liverpool game." And you think, well, yeah, okay. But yeah, he picked me and got my goal and had a hand in the second one. My third game was the Saturday after Old Trafford away. So not 3 nice, easy games to introduce you into the first team, which was probably good because you know the standard that's being set. You know what's expected of you. And luckily, it all went well for me.
What was it like playing? I mean, obviously you were a local boy. Did the Forest fans take to you straight away? Does that give you an advantage, you think?
Yeah, I mean, your mates are always there. Your family's there. It really does help. I used to go and watch with my dad in the children's pen in the Trent End, when I was a kid, when they, the 67 team, when they came runners up to Manchester United and got to the semi-final of the FA Cup. We all remember the great Everton game that Ian Storey-Moore scored the hat-trick in. It was that era, I went to watch them. So, I was a big Forest fan anyway. And, to play for your hometown team is just an absolute privilege. And, you tend to, I would think, to give a little bit more because of that. And you want to please the fans. And, the fans were always brilliant with me.
Obviously, Brian did some different things to, ease your nerves, keep you motivated, that kind of stuff. I know there's the classic one about shaving before the cup final. Can you tell listeners that either that story or something else that sticks out about the kind of man management things that he would do with players?
Well, that was the European Cup final, the first one. And we were obviously in Munich and it was red hot. And we all were told to get into the garden of the hotel and wait there for him and the gaffer, Pete, to come down. We'd all put our stuff on the coach, and he came down, and I was nervous as hell because I was, along with Viv, the two youngest players, but Viv had got a lot of experience at that point. And he could see I was nervous, and I always used to keep a little bit of stubble. It was just something I did before a game, and he saw it and said, "Son, what's that on your chin?" I said, "Well, I always do it, Gaffer. It's something I do before a game." And he said, "Get it shaved off now." I said, "Well, all my stuff's on the coach. It's all packed away." He said, "Right." He said, "I've got a shaver in my room." He said, "Has anybody got any aftershave for Gaz?" And Chris Woods, he was there as well. Goalkeepers always have little man bags with everything in. He had some aftershave. He said, "Right, get up there, get it shaved off and get back down here." Chris, go up with him. So Woodsy came up with me, got it done, and it made me bleed a little bit. So little bits of toilet paper on it to stop it bleeding, as anybody who used to shave in those days with the old shaver's knows. But he did it, looking back, just to take the pressure off, to give me something else to think about, going to the stadium, because we used to get there about just an hour before the game.
Yeah.
So it took the pressure, got me thinking about something else, and you only realise that when you look back and think, why? So he was a genius in man management, and all the way through, my career, and you would ask any other the players at that era, would say the same. He was just a genius with man management.
So he would handle different players differently. Obviously, that would work for you. That wouldn't. Would he be very different with Kenny Burns and Larry Lloyd then, for example?
Absolutely, because those two weren't afraid of him at all. They would give us, as good as they got. The famous story with Larry with the suit, when we're all told, I think it was Athens we're coming back from, and we're all told to put the suits on, the blazers and the grey trousers, and we all came down, and Larry came down in shorts, and we'd all been told, and whether he was just trying it on, and Larry was having none of it. And we got back to Nottingham, and we had a meeting on a Friday in the boardroom, and Larry got the red tree, the letter with the tree on it, which was a fine.
Right.
So it was, I think it was about 200 quid. And Larry said, "Not paying it." He said, "Right, okay." He said, "Every time you say that, I'm going to double it." He said, "I don't care, I'm not paying it." So he kept going up, double it, 400, 800. He said, "I'm still not paying it." And I think eventually he paid the 200 quid. So that's how it was in those days. And Yeah, it was a pleasure to be there because day to day you just didn't know what to expect.
Mm.
Go in one day, he'd run you, and if you'd had a bad game or something, you think, well, he's going to run us, and he'd walk you up the Trent to the little cafeteria that's still there on the embankment, buy you tea, a soup, whatever, walk back, and you think, right, okay, we're going to do some running. He said, right, I'll see you Thursday. This is on a Monday. Bring your passports in. We're going to Callum. And you think, well, how can that not lift you? And that was again man management. You'd probably not had a good game. You'd scrape through a game, and all of a sudden you were going to Spain for 3 or 4 days. How good's that? And if that doesn't lift you as a professional, nothing will. And it rejuvenates you, it lifts you, and you go out and perform again.
You talked about man management a lot there. Was that his greatest strength then, above anything else in terms of tactics or signings or that kind of stuff?
Well, he knew who he could put an arm around, and he knew who he could give a rollicking to, and the response he'd get. I think they went into things like that, him and Pete, individually. They looked at players, knew what players' strengths were, what the weaknesses were, who they could, really have a go at, and the ones that, weren't particularly good at taking, rollickings off them. And that's the way it worked. And, he kept things simple. He never ever sort of said, right, you've got to go out and do this. If you were in the team, you knew what you had to do. You knew what your job was, and you didn't need to be told. Once you're in the team, that was it. If you didn't do what he expected, then you're out the team, and that was it. And he said, I don't care if you have a bad game. If you give me 100%, he said, I'll come on the pitch and carry you off myself. And, when you've got a manager saying things like that to you, it gives you a lift, because you've just got to go out and give everything you possibly got. You're going to make mistakes, but he never dwelt on your weaknesses. That was the beauty of it. He only dwelt on what you were good at, and that gives a player a huge amount of confidence going out on the pitch, and that was a big part of why we were successful, I think.
Obviously, he's got the reputation, of wouldn't mess with him, the brilliant interviews and all that. So there was. Did you ever get to know a kind of a softer side or a different side to him that was different to his reputation? Because you knew him obviously until the day he died.
Not softer side. Probably when we'd retired. When we'd no longer play for the club and we'd packed in football. Myself and John Robertson used to go down to City Ground. And Robbo used to do the Telegraph crossword, and the gaffer would see us and said, are you going to come in for a coffee or whatever? And we said, okay, gaffer. He said, no, don't call me, call me Brian. But we could never do that. We could never bring ourselves to do that, because he's the gaffer. He's always been the gaffer, and it was sort of sacrilege to be caught saying anything else. And it was total respect for what he did for us. And the other thing I remember, the one story that I always tell about when we were going to Q8. This is another side of him that was something you ought to know about, I suppose. It was a Sunday. We were going to Q8 for a game that meant nothing, and I was injured. And it was after the European, the European team was broke up. And we were told to be at the City Ground for 9 o'clock on Sunday. We're going down to Heathrow to fly out to Q8. And I was livid, because on a Sunday it was pub day. Pub opened at 12, local pub, the Cadland. Used to be in there, have a few pints in the afternoon, go home, watch a bit of American football. And then we used to come back at night time and have a few more pints. And that wasn't going to happen that Sunday. So I got to the ground, got on the coach. I was at the back of the coach and having a right, moan with all the other lads, saying, what am I doing here? Should be in the pub, blah, blah, blah. The gaffer comes a bit late, comes to the back of the coach. And I made sure that he could hear me a little bit. He said, right, son, out with it. What's your problem? And I said, Gaffer, you're taking me halfway around the world for a game I can't play in. I think I'd be better staying here, get myself fit and get back in the team. He said, son, you're right. And Albert, the bus driver, was down Wilford Lane by that time. He said, Albert, stop this bus. So he stopped the bus. Gaffer jumped off. First car coming the other way. He stands in the middle of the road, puts his hand up. old guy gets out. He said, "Can you take Gaz back to the ground? He's not coming with us." So probably a guy going to church on a Sunday morning. So I jumped in this guy's car. He drops me off, gets in the car, goes home, in the pub, gets back home, get a phone call mid-afternoon Sunday from Ian Wallace.
Mm.
Then what are you doing? No mobiles in those days. He said, I said, "What are you doing?" Phoning from Q8. He said, "Not in Q8. He said, I'm back in Clifton." So what do you mean you're back in Clifton? He said, "Well, we went down there, got on the plane, and the takeoff was aborted. They had to come back down again. And the gaffer never liked flying. Everybody knows he hated flying."
Mm.
And he got up, said to the stewardess, "Young lady, open the door. We're getting off." And she said, "Well, you can't. You can't do that." The young lady opened the door. We're getting off. So he marched the whole team back across party lounge. The elders had gone back to the bus, so they had to get another bus, and everybody went back home. So nobody went to Q8.
I'm going to just read a couple of comments out, then I'll put a question to you. This will stroke your ego a bit, Gary. Garry Birtles is the greatest. That's from Paul Carrington. Lee Tilston, no questions, but I've met Gary a few times in recent years and just want to say he's an absolute gentleman, everything you want your idols to be. And I'm sure any Forest fan who's met you will appreciate that. Sean Murphy, been lucky to meet Gary a few times, a real gentleman. Here's a question. I think we've touched on this before, but it's from Rich Thorpe. Do you think Cloughy was the genius because of the simplicity of how he explained the game? Is that a fair comment from Rich, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Spot on. You couldn't have put it any better myself. It was the simplicity. He never complicated things. He always believed that you were better than anybody else. We never did any homework on teams. We respected them. Yes, he always said, respect your opposition, but you're better than them. Even the great Liverpool side, who, we beat for 2 years, they were the best team in the world at that particular point, and we were the only team that could beat them. And it was that simplicity. Never complicated anything whatsoever. He believed in you to go out and do the job that he was paying you to do, without a doubt.
Glenn Page also says you're a legend, Gary. Is it nice to hear?
I'll tell you what about why I learned a really good lesson with me and my dad. We went, when I was a kid, on a Sunday mornings, there were signing sessions at the City Ground. And all the fans used to go down, the players used to sign things. And I went down with my dad, and it got to me, and they stopped signing things and they refused to sign. And I remember that vividly. One of the things I do remember vividly, my dad said, if you ever get in a position, always remember, on your way up, people remember how you are. And on the way down, if you were disrespectful to them and ignored them, they remember that as well. And that was one of the best pieces of advice I ever had. And I always remembered that. And I never, ever turned anybody down in all my career. Even when I go commentating now, when people, you've got all books still coming to sign, which, when you're in your 60s and people still want your autograph, is brilliant. I never turn anybody down, never have done, because it's a privileged position. To play professional football, something so many people want to do, and I was one of the lucky ones to be able to do that. Come from a council estate in Chilwell, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that was given. And if you can't be bothered to stand and sign autographs, well, then you don't deserve to be in that position. That's part of your job. And it was a great part of the job, signing autographs. Crikey, people still want you to do it. How good is that? So my dad gave me some great advice at that point.
I'm just going back to kind of insight into how it all works and how you were so successful as a team. I mean, what was training like then? Because obviously Brian was a great player. Did he get hands-on in training, or did Peter Taylor do that, or was it someone else's role, tactics and all that kind of stuff?
Neither of them involved very often at all. Very rarely did we see them on the training ground. They never came and did any tactical stuff with us. They used to come down at some point with the dogs. Pete had Bess, and the gaffer had Del Boy, and they used to come down and just watch things. And the only thing they ever did was, they come down, the gaffer said, right, everybody, run through the nettles now. There's a little corner in the training ground with a clump of trees, loaded nettles, where the groundsman used to dump his manure.
Yeah.
You've got 16 grown men running through nettles, and then you come out the other side, and he said, right, last man in the 5-a-side nets. You got 16 grown men throwing themselves into a five-a-side net. How ridiculous is that? I mean, would you see Manchester United and Jurgen Klopp do that with players now? No, you wouldn't. And it was to lighten things up. It was because we played a lot of games. In those 2 seasons, I counted all the games I played. I think I was around about 136 games I played in 2 seasons. That's with pre-season games, friendlies, and as anybody will tell you, there's no such thing as a friendly in the eyes of Brian Clough. Every game was like you were playing Liverpool. So there had to be light moments, there had to be serious moments, and he blended the whole thing really, really well. And you just used to love going in, no matter how tired you were, and it was just a joy to be part of it.
I was going to have this as one of my last questions, but I'll ask it now because you've sort of touched on it. Do you think his methods would work today, or would he have evolved his methods to fit football as it is? How successful would Brian Clough have been managing in 2020, do you think?
He would have adapted to that. He used to write for, I think it's 424 magazine or 442 magazine, the 442 magazine, I think. And I used to read that. And as the years went on, he went along with progress. He wouldn't have stayed situated in the past, and that European Cup final, the second one, would tell you that story, because we lost Trevor Francis and Gary Mills came in, and it was 4-4-2 we were playing, me and Gary up front, and after 10 or so minutes we were getting absolutely battered, and he dropped Gary back into midfield, so we got 5 in midfield and me up front, and that was in 1980. So you talk about 4-5-1s. They saw the danger then and said, right, okay, we're changing this after 10 minutes. You don't often see that very now in the modern game. It's all like substitutes. Oh, you can say on the hour mark, well, all the subs are coming on. Yeah, there's an hour gone in the game. It's all quite predictable. But, he had the foresight to try and change things, and he would have changed things, and he would have adapted. And the biggest crime ever that the FA never gave him the England job, because we'd have won something by now if he'd have been the England manager at that particular point.
I appreciate I'm a bit all over the place here, but going back to the season when you won the league, how did he?
I wasn't in that team.
But okay. But from what you've heard from people, okay, when you won the European Cups, then when you were there, how did he manage the rapid progress you were making, and keep you grounded and keep the momentum going? Because you were obviously, even though you were champions, you were still massively overachieving, weren't you, as a club?
Well, when you look back now, yes, we were. And you listen to what Graham Souness said. It's probably the greatest story that's ever happened in football. Larry Lloyd said that, and he said, I think Larry's right. And for Graham Souness to say that, you sit up and listen, because he, for me, is one of the best pundits on television. And that team of Liverpool's was so very, very good at that particular point. And to have that accolade from somebody like him means an awful lot. And he did keep your feet on the ground. We used to do so much off the pitch, going to hospitals. Remember myself and Viv playing wheelchair football at Mansfield. Used to send players in pairs, to do things around the community. And that was just to show you how lucky you were. You realised how lucky you were. And, you took all that on board. And anybody who didn't do that were very much out on the heels very quickly. You had to do that. You had to be part. And you wanted to do that. It wasn't you had to do it. You were pleased to do it. And I know players do it now. It doesn't get publicised as much now. I think players get a hard time sometimes because a lot of people don't see exactly what they do behind the scenes. But we were doing it back then. And, we loved every minute of doing that as well.
And it's fair to say he had a big social conscience, didn't he? He had strong political views. So did that translate into football, like you talked with the hospital visit and all that stuff?
He never brought politics into it. We all knew, what he was about, and how strong he was in his beliefs in everything he did. But that's what made him the manager he was. If he didn't have those beliefs, you listen to his interviews. There's been an ITV program on just lately of our triumphs in there, and you listen to him. He said, if the players can't see me believing, well, what chance have they got to believe in? And that was it. His strength was being on screen, being that confident person, ultra confident. When the 3-3 in the semi-final against Cologne, if you're daft enough to write us off, that sort of comment, and that again lifts you as a player. And he was brilliant at that. And even the players who probably didn't like him and get on with him as much, even now would say that without him, their careers wouldn't have been what they were. And, those sort of accolades will ring true for a long time.
When you got picked for England, I know Stuart Pearce said that he kept him down to earth by saying he didn't deserve to get picked and anything like that, something like that. Do you remember what it was like when you got picked for England and what he said to you, or is that too long in the past?
I don't think he said a great deal, actually. It was sublime because I signed in 1976. I was laying floors, playing for Long Eaton Rovers on a Sunday afternoon and Long Eaton United. And within, 4 years, I'd won 2 European Cups, a Super Cup, a League Cup, scored 4 at Wembley in the final, 2 disallowed, and been voted Young European Player of the Year. In 4 years. So that just tells you, the impact he had on me and what he gave me. And, going, through, the sort of the lockdown and coronavirus and things like that, it's easy to get yourself down, but the discipline he gave you in those years really helps in this sort of situation. Your mental strength he gave me, particularly coming, as a raw young lad from non-league. Really helped. It's really helped me and held me in good stead. And you remember those things, for many years. You remember the good times of playing, but you also remind yourself of what he did for you off the pitch as well.
How much did you change as a person in those 4 years, if at all, do you think, because you've gone from nowhere to stardom?
Yeah, you do. And, some of it wasn't good. Some of it you're not proud of. At times, you probably get above yourself a little bit because of the euphoria surrounding everything. Those 2 years were just incredible. Those 2 years when we were winning things and you were that wrapped up in what was going on. Sometimes you probably did things that you shouldn't have done that you're not proud of. And I'm sure all of us will say that, but you try to be sort of humble about it, and you learn as you get a little bit older. Certainly that's the way it should be, and that's why we've never craved anything. The team that won all those things in that particular time, we've never craved the fame. We've never sort of chased after it. It's just Johnny Owen bringing that fantastic film, I Believe in Miracles, that put us back in the public eye. And we were just going along a merry way. Yeah, we won what we did. We're delighted with it, but we never sort of bragged about it. It was just our job to do that, and that film just put us back on the map a little, and the club. Because what Brian Clough did at that particular time wasn't just win those things; it put Nottingham on the map. You used to go on holiday at that particular point, and people say, you made friends on holiday, as everybody does. Where you're from, Nottingham? Oh, Robin Hood, and that was it. But then years later, Brian Clough, Nottingham Forest, absolutely fantastic. And then, Torval and Dean, the Notts cricket team winning the league, and all these little things put Nottingham on the map. But Brian Clough and Peter Taylor were a big part of putting Nottingham on the map at that particular point. And you've got a lot to thank them for in that respect as well, not just the football, but putting Nottingham on the map.
Do you regret leaving Nottingham? I've spoken about it to you before in your column. Obviously, you went to Man United, and it worked out in a way, but you obviously had struggles there as well. Do you wish you'd never gone there now, or not?
No, it taught me quite a lot. I didn't want to go particularly, but my hand was forced a little bit. The one time I probably had a falling out with Brian and Peter was at that point. He did something put something in Shoot magazine saying that everything I got, the car I got was because of him, the house was because of him, things like that. And my mum read it and it upset her. And when your mum's upset, you're upset. It's probably he was trying to wind me up as he did, but it got to me a little bit. And Manchester United was always my second team because of George Best. And the opportunity to go to Manchester United doesn't come up for everybody very often. So I went and, just fully expected to carry on being successful. And that didn't happen. My debut was at Stoke away, went round the goalkeeper. It was torrential rain, weaker right foot. It was going in. I hit the target, but it stuck in the mud. And the fullback just slid right across the line and hooked us off the line. And then Everton was my first home game. Curled the ball round. Seamus McDonough was in goal at that particular point.
Oh yeah.
Hit the outside of the post, and those two go in. It's a different career. But then I got a bad injury that not a lot of people know about. It was called, I think, synthesis pubis, which is a stress fracture of the pubic bone, which Ray Wilkins had. He'd signed just before me, and he was out, and I got the same thing. And he told me how bad it could be. You can't do anything. You can't drive a car. All you do was walk and nothing else. So I missed out on a couple of months and had to catch up, which wasn't easy. But you talked about pre-seasons. It's so much needed, and didn't help. And then I couldn't score to save my life, and all the jokes were there. Coming out with the first thing, the hostages of the Iranian embassy. Has Birtles scored yet? And if I'd have shot John Lennon, he'd still be alive today, and those sort of things. And
did that get to you?
Yeah. Luckily, I think it went the other way. I nearly killed myself on the way back from Manchester because I was still living in Nottingham, and I think it was the Everton game. We'd been beaten by Everton, and Dave Watson, the good, terrific centre half. I think he was making his debut, and I played against him. He never gave me a kick. I had a bad game again, and it was torrential rain. I was going back through the Ashbourne-Leek route back to Long Eaton, and I was going around a corner, and I had AC/DC on full blast, not concentrating, lost control of the car going around a corner, and skidded across the road, and ended up. Luckily, there was a farm up there, and the iron gate was open. So I went across, and didn't hit anything, just came to rest. And it was a route where the aggregate lorries, all drove big things with, heavy loads. So if I'd have hit one of those, it would have been nasty to say the least. I just sat there for a few minutes and thought, this is ridiculous. Nothing's that important that you're feeling like this. And that really helped. It changed around. I started scoring. Frank Stapleton came to the club, which really helped me. And, I started enjoying it again. And, but you have moments in your career where you're down in the depths. That was one of them. But, you've got to get yourself out of it.
So how did you end up back at Forest then? And did you have to rebuild your relationship with Brian if you left on not bad terms, but you said there was a bit of a cloud. Was there any rebuilding to do or not?
No, because, he wanted me back. When I heard that, Brian wanted me to come back, I'd have walked down the M62 to come back because, I love Nottingham. I was missing Nottingham, miss your friends and everything. I mean, that's crazy because, it's a short career, so you should be able to adapt to things like that. But when things aren't going well for you, you want to go back to where you feel safe, I suppose. I signed, a lot of. If I'd have stayed at Manchester, I signed a 5-year contract. My house would have been paid for. I had to sign a signing on fee. I waived it because I was desperate to get back. Am I allowed to say, how much it was to?
You allowed to say what?
Am I allowed to say what it was? I signed away to come back to Forest.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could have stayed there. My house would have been paid for through the contract. I signed away £40,000, which in those days
it's a lot of money now. Yeah.
So I said, right, I don't want it. I just want to go. I just want to go back and play football. So I signed away all that and came back. Scored on my debut on the way back when I came back, and just slid back into it like I'd never been away, which was lucky because sometimes it doesn't work like that. And the success wasn't as good afterwards. We got to the semi-final of that competition where Anderlecht cheated us. That's as good as it got. But yeah, it all went well. I started playing centre half. He asked me to play centre half there, and apparently I nearly got called up for England to play centre half. Which extended my career when I went to Notts County and then finished up at Grimsby. So it all worked out quite nicely.
I'm going to ask you about the Anderlecht thing in a minute. When you came back to Forest, was it a different club and was your role different? Obviously, Nigel Clough was coming through and it was a different kind of squad. Did you notice that change or not?
No, it was like coming back home again. Yeah, there were some players still there. I think Ian Bowyer Robbo was still there. Other players were coming in. Paul Hart came in. Nigel was great. although his dad took the number 9 off me and gave it to him, which I didn't enjoy, but it wasn't a problem. We still laugh about it now because we're very good friends with Nigel. And yeah, it was just like stepping back into a family atmosphere again. And the players with Colin Walsh was coming through, people like Steve Wigley, Steve Hodge, Chris Fairclough. We signed Kenny Swain. Hans van Breukelen came in. All these great players. Frank Tyson came in. It was a great time to play, and it was particularly strong at that point. The Premier League, or the First Division as it was. But it was competitive. It was good, and I thoroughly enjoyed when I came back.
Just on the Anderlecht game, I mean, for people who don't know, the referee was bribed, and that all went through the courts 20 years later. When you were there at the time during the game, I mean, I've watched it back. Some ridiculous stuff going on. What was it like playing in that, and what was it like afterwards in terms of how the manager reacted to it?
Well, I didn't start because I was just coming back from a spinal fusion. I had a spinal fusion in 1984, and I came back. I was on the bench for that game away, and I could see what was going on there. I didn't know what had gone on in the dressing room. The gaffer had seen the referee's room, which was across from where we were. Officials keep going in and out, and the door was open, and that's not supposed to happen. We didn't see that, but you saw what was going on the pitch, and the penalty was the most ridiculous penalty you will ever see in your life. If only you've seen it. Kenny Swain was nowhere near him. The other goals were good. The great player, great free kick taker, scored a fabulous goal, and they were a very good side. But we had that goal disallowed late on, Paul Hart's header, which was nothing wrong with. I was close to it. No foul, no contact, can't be offside from a corner, nothing. We were celebrating, referee had given a foul. Next minute, they're going up the pitch. And we just couldn't believe what had gone on. And, there was a sense of disbelief after the game, just total silence in the dressing room. We wondered what had gone on. And then when it all came out, we could understand why. And, a Spanish referee saying he had a loan off a Belgian football club just didn't ring true. And I feel so sorry for all the lads, in that particular team who hadn't won things before. I was lucky enough to be part of the team that had won things. People like Paul Hart, would have been great. Would have been an All England final against Tottenham, who we fancied we could beat. That didn't happen, and it denied a lot of those players the opportunity to win something. And that's what rankles more than anything. And then for their owner and chairman to then come out and admit it when he knew the number of years had run out where they could be punished or we could claim compensation, that rankled even more, because that you're cheating us and rubbing it even more now. Went to court. We went across there, trying to get the compensation for what happened. But the slippery owner, and the stadium's still named after him, which again rankles, as much now as it did then. But you think UEFA or somebody would step in and say, right, you're out of order. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. But they were weak and they didn't, and it still really rankles.
You left Forest in the end. Was it 1987 you left? You moved on?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
What was it like then? You've kind of been such a big part of your life. Were you gutted to go, or did you feel it was time to move on? How did you view it?
I didn't want to move on. The gaffer thought it was time to move on. And when I retired, he said, he came to me when I was down at the ground. He said, son, I'll let you go at least a year too early. And that was one of the worst days of my career because I didn't want to leave. I still think I thought I got something a little bit to offer. And it was the year that I think Coventry beat Tottenham in the FA Cup final. And I was that fed up, with football. I didn't even watch the game. I went and played golf at Woollerton Park because I just didn't want anything to do with football at that particular point. But you get over it. Went across the river to Notts County, nearly got promotion. We were top of the table all season and went into the playoffs and lost in the playoffs, which again was a big disappointment. But then went to Grimsby and got a couple of automatic promotions at the back end of my career, which, I enjoyed as much as winning European Cups because Alan Buckley was brilliant. when I went there, I asked him, I said, what sort of football do you play? He said, we play 4-4-2, we pass the ball, blah, blah, blah. I said, give me a pen. Signed there and then. And he was true to his word. And we had 2 great years. I worked with some, lovely young players who absolutely loved what they were doing. Met up with Keith Alexander, who I played with non-league way back in the Young Elizabethan League. And, it was nice to catch up with him again and play with him at Grimsby. So, yeah, I was so fortunate in my football career, to come from, where I came from, Chilwell, you talk about council estates. And, yeah, it was, there were great people up there. Still see them now and on the streets, and you still see, you still have the banter with them. And, you just realise how very, very lucky you are to have been part of, all that you were part of.
There's lots more comments saying what a nice bloke you are. I'm not going to read them all out because of stressing you enough already. Glenn Page asks, who do you keep in contact that we used to play with, Gary? Are you still in touch with many of the ex-Forest lads?
Yeah, we before the virus came along, we go out on a Thursday afternoon, myself, Robbo, Colin Barrett, Frank Clark, John McGovern pops in, Johnny Owen. We go to West Bridgeford to, a couple of beers on a Thursday afternoon, which is really nice. And you still keep in touch with other. Nigel I keep in touch with, very much so. People from different clubs I played with, you try and keep in touch with, and it's nice to do that because it is a football family, and you want to be part of that and continue to be part of that.
Last Brian Clough question: what was it like? What was your relationship like with him in later years? Because obviously he'd struggled with drink for a long time. He was back in, he got his life back on track in that sense. But was he still a very much sort of a father figure or a great mentor to you throughout, even along?
Massively. Yeah. He always said, remember who you are, where you are, and who you represent. And that sticks in your mind forever. I talked about the comments from my dad, but that from Brian, remember who you are, where you come from, and, where you are. When you're out, you're representing the football club, you're representing your family. And that, I've tried to bring all my children up the same, to have those manners, to have those morals that I was given by, my parents and Brian in particular. And, when Nigel phoned me and told me his dad had passed away, it was like losing somebody of your own family. It really was. Because the impact he had on you was just immense. I remember where it was. I pulled up the car, and he asked me if they could give the family sort of 4 or 5 hours, and then I was to tell Sky TV and the BBC and everybody else, the Evening Post and things like that. And it was an earth-shattering moment, really, because you thought he was invincible. He was one of those characters. But he came into, when we were doing the radio show at Capital. What was it called? Yeah, I can't remember what it's called now.
Trent.
No, it's now Heart.
Yeah,
it was Capital anyway. I did the football phone in with Kenny and Alan Birchall, Roger Davis, Darren Fletcher. He used to come on, and this is another thing. The effect he had on people. Alan Birchall is one of the most confident, cocky people you will ever wish to meet. He's a lovely bloke, would ever wish to meet in your life. And he was an absolute wreck. He said, "What will I call him? What will I say? What have I got to do?" And he was an absolute equivalent wreck. I couldn't believe the difference in him, and that's the sort of impact Brian Clough had. He was one of those. When you see go into a room, the room stops. He goes silent. When he walked in, that's the impact he had. He had so much charisma. It was incredible. And you just wish there were more like him now, because it's a bit sterile now. You ask, manager interviewed and about decisions. Oh, I haven't seen it yet. Didn't see it, and blah. You wish to come out and say, yeah, not impressed with that. But that's the way it is. Brian was a one-off. There'll be never anybody like him, and we feel so lucky that we had the opportunity to play under him.
I'm just going to finish up with a bit of a memory test for you. Like I said before we started this, I was going to ask you some questions from old programs. These are from the 80s. And I think I found 3, and your answers are all very consistent. So I think you might do quite well on this. Quick fire ones. Who was your football hero in your childhood?
George Best.
Yes. Why? Just because he was just that brilliant?
He was just flamboyant. He was different. He had everything. He was brave. He just had everything. He could head the ball. He could go both ways. And John Robertson, in that respect, maybe not as good a header as, but I look at Robbo and still marvel over what he did as a player, a right-footed player playing on the left wing. I just used to love George Best.
Last couple. This is from the mid-80s, so you might have changed one now. Favourite food and drink? This was for, I think, an Old Forest programme. Do you remember what you would have said your favourite food and drink was?
I would think steak, and I hate to admit it, lager and lime at
yes.
some point.
Yes, any steak.
I soon got rid of the lime, by the way. Oh, dear me.
Any steak, Dover sole, lager and lime.
So Dover sole. I still love fish now, yeah.
Miscellaneous likes and dislikes. What are your hobbies? Do you remember what your hobbies were back then?
Hobbies were squash. Was I saving beer mats at the time or something like that?
It says collecting records.
Oh, record collection. I've still got a good record collection, yeah. And hates false people.
Yes, false people in all the programs.
I've always hated people who are, they're not true. They're not. You can pick them out. They're not. They come across as okay, but they're not really. I like people who are honest and straightforward, and I just couldn't stand people like that. Still the same, but that's me. I'm sorry.
Favorite holiday destination?
Oh my word, this is difficult. I used to go to a place in Wales. I don't know if that's still there.
It is, yeah.
Morphineffin.
Yes, Morphineffin. I'm glad you pronounced it.
Yeah.
For me. Yeah. Favorite singers?
Alice Cooper.
Yes.
Who would have AC/DC at that time could possibly be on there, yeah.
Yeah. And Mike Oldfield was the other one.
Oh, that was only because of Tubular Bells. That's the only reason. I love Tubular Bells.
And lastly, which people would you most like to meet in the world? There's 2 answers you gave.
Yeah, Jimmy Connors and Alice Cooper.
Yes, very good. Did you meet them?
No, never, unfortunately. I love Jimmy Connors. I just loved what he gave on a tennis court. He just gave everything he possibly had. He possibly wasn't as talented as the Borgs and the McEnroes, but my word, what he put into a game of tennis was just incredible. And that's how I approach football. I tried to give everything I possibly could during the summer break. I would try and tick over, so I was well prepared when I came back. I could start running straight away and not feel overly bad with it. So you try and at that point be as professional as you can. And I watched him and I thought, well, if I can do that, what he does on the tennis court on a football pitch and training wise, I'll be happy.
Brilliant. Well, I know we've spoken many times over the years for your column, but it's been a real pleasure to give people a good insight into your own career and we're playing under Brian Clough. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for everyone who's listened in. There's lots of comments saying what a good bloke Garry is. We really appreciate that.
I thought you were going to talk about the present day.
Oh, do you want to talk about present day? We've got 5 minutes.
That's what you've done about, yeah.
Do you want to? Okay. Let's have a look at some of the questions. What's your verdict on VAR?
Well, as a commentator, I had to go down. Every commentator and co-commentator had to go down to the place where VAR is held near Heathrow and go through everything. You had to sit with screens in front of you with some of the guys who were doing the VAR, and they give you different scenarios in different games of what you saw and what you do and what your decision would be. And that was really insightful. And Neil Swarbrick was there, the referee who oversees it. And it looked good at that particular point where, I picked up on something they'd not seen as an ex-player in the decision-making. And I said to Neil Swarbrick afterwards, I said, I honestly think you should have an ex-player in there because a couple of the things there as an ex-player I saw that the referees didn't see and they've not been picked up on. And I think, having a referee in there, but an ex-player in there as well to balance it up would be an absolute perfect scenario. But obviously it fell on deaf ears. It's still not being incorporated. And I think it would be a real innovation to get ex-players involved because they see things differently. And, you can bounce off each other. You've got the time to do that.
Let me ask you a couple of quick present-day Forest questions. What did you make of the end-of-season collapse? Could you see it coming or not?
Unfortunately, I think the answer is yes, a little bit, because I think we're a little bit lucky at times. I look through the season, the stats and everything, because I do that as a co-commentator. And there are only 2 games in the whole season where we went behind in a game and came back and won it. 2 games. And that was Luton at home and Stoke away when Stoke were having a nightmare. So that tells you, if we score first, we sit back and we encourage pressure. And that's what caught us out in the run into the end of the season. The Derby late equaliser, the Sheffield Wednesday late equaliser. And I just think at times we're lucky because if Lewis Grabban got injured, what would have happened? He stayed fit. And we rode a lot at times. We look good at certain points, but you watch the 2 teams who went up and the way they went about the business, totally different, totally positive, went for it, thought they were the better team. I just thought the signings in the windows were particularly poor. That let us down, and you just hope that'll change. But the one big plus for me was the structure of the club. Mr. Marinakis had got the people in the right areas, the chairman, Johnny Owen got involved in the media side of it, which massively improved things. And everything off the pitch seemed to be spot on. And if they can get it spot on the pitch, then anything's possible. But it's got to happen, this season. The last day of the season, Reading getting somebody sent off just before half-time didn't help. But at 1-1, you expect, to be able to be professional and hold on. I just wondered at times why Michael Dawson was kept on the bench, because if he'd have come on in 2 or 3 of the games with his experience, with his leadership, with his vocality, I think we would have come out. We'd have been in the playoffs. But it's a young side, and at times that we got caught out because of that. But let's just hope we can, bounce back this coming season, get the signings right. I think we didn't have a plan B. That was a big problem for me. If we went, late on, if we went behind or whatever, it seemed to be a scattergun effect. Right, who can we throw on the pitch here? And you say, right, him, and him. And, there was no real, if it's going wrong, what can we do sort of thing. And, it's a learning curve for Lemouche, obviously, because he doesn't know anything about the Championship. It would have been maybe innovative to get somebody who knew about the Championship in to help him out. And maybe he had that, I don't know. But, let's hope lessons have been learned. But, just hopefully the structure's kept the same, because that was the one big thing about the new stand and everything like that going to happen. Everything was good off the pitch, but it didn't quite happen on the pitch. So, that's probably the perfect summing up of it.
Would you object if I ended the show? I think producer Dan's got a meeting at 11, so I was going to.
Oh, bless. Yeah, not a problem.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and we really do appreciate it. If people want to give us the review on Apple iTunes, listen on Spotify, Acast, watch us on YouTube as normal, just search Garibaldi Red in all the podcast apps, and we have been live on Facebook. We'll be back next week, but like I say, thanks very much to Gary. It's been a real pleasure. And we hope to see you all. Thanks very much, guys. See you all, everyone.